I just wanted to circle back to Montreal Screw Job because I remember vividly where I was, 13-year-old watching that play out on my TV, not understanding at all what had happened, just thinking, that looks weird. Like that wasn't supposed to happen. Like, and then the show just cut off. I didn't really, not really knowing the politics or anything that was happening at the time, not really reading dirt sheets or anything like that. I just didn't really understand what I'd seen. I just knew that it was weird. Um, how did the Montreal screw job? Well, I guess first question: where were you on the night of the screw job? Were you watching Survivor
I
Series?
was watching it at home on a
Yeah.
pay-per-view, and I
Uh-huh.
was stunned, just like everybody else, because we had no idea that was going to happen. A lot of us knew there was, some controversy, and there's going to be some awkwardness about how they would unload the match. That there would have to be outside interference and a run-in of some kind. So we knew that going into the match, but none of us could anticipate this sabotage, on Bret, right?
Yeah.
Or where we'd get screwed out of the title, and so it was just bizarre. It was shocking, and then the events that followed after, him spitting at Vince McMahon at ringside and breaking the cameras. I mean, obviously Bret was very livid. He was very angry. He felt betrayed. You know, it was a complete betrayal, um, and you know, and he knew he had been deceived, right, and he had been screwed, and he kind of fell into their trap. Even Earl Hebner, the referee, who had assured him before the match he would never do anything like that, but he had a gun pretty much put to his head and said, "You need to go along with this finish if you want to keep a job here."
Yeah.
So for Bret to be kind of humiliated and embarrassed like that, by his boss and the company he had worked so hard for, made so many sacrifices for, was tough, and then we saw the film version of the documentary that had been done on him, we see Vince McMahon coming out of the dressing room after Bret had nailed him with a nice punch in the dressing room, and they didn't get that on film, but they did get they did show Vince being carried out of the dressing room, and I think he'd broken his ankle, I think, in the fall too. It was either his ankle or knee, but that Wrestling with the Shadows film coverage was just incredible because they had all those shots of the match, and then before and after the matches, even Triple H being confronted by Bret's wife, about his part or an involvement in the match was just incredible. There was that film footage, that they had for this documentary they were doing on Bret. So, but yeah, like anybody else, I was just shocked and completely stunned at what had happened.
How did it affect, you and your family? Because of course this is bigger than Brett. This is so many of your brothers are employed by that company. So many of your sisters are married to talent who are employed by that company. Like, the Hart family and the WWF and Vince McMahon are so intertwined at this point, aren't they? This is much bigger than just one person's contract situation.
Yeah, it left a lot of us in limbo because we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew Bret would be going to WCW, and we had no idea how that was going to play out. And unfortunately, they really mismanaged and wasted him. That's another story altogether. But I had a lot of concern about Owen and Davey, who were still signed, and Jim Neidhart, who were still signed with WWE at that time, and what was going to happen to them. As it turns out, Davey demanded to be released from his contract, and he didn't want to stay there anymore. And I think Owen initially didn't want to stay there, and he wanted to be released from his contract. I mean, they were obviously upset and very loyal to Bret over what happened. And in the end result, Owen ended up staying, But I can say too that Owen never ever felt comfortable about going to WCW. He he had a lot of apprehension about going there just because they were so disorganized and chaotic. And even though they were doing pretty good business at the time, and there was the Monday Night War rivalry with Raw against Nitro, and they had a lot of big stars and had taken a lot of the WWE's big stars, but Owen never ever felt comfortable about going there, about stepping out of the WWE and going into that environment where he had no idea.
Which is interesting because, of
Yeah,
course, we saw how it played out with Bret and Davey and Jim and how all three of them got really lost in the shuffle at WCW.
yeah,
Ironically, Owen is the one that I could have seen really settling in because instead of, doing the Nation of Domination thing and all the various kind of creative things he went through in 1998, 99, if he'd been in WCW and used correctly, he could have been in there with Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko,
yeah,
Chris Benoit. Like he was literally surrounded by workers who were on the same skill set and wavelength as him.
yeah.
He could have, I know in some ways it would have been a step down being a cruiserweight, but actually that it was the cruiserweight division, which was why most people tuned into WCW who were pure wrestling fans. In some respects, all the dream matches with Owen Hart were in WCW, not the WWF. But equally, of course, culturally, the place was going in every single direction as Bret, Davey, and Jim experienced when they went there.
Yeah. And by and large, he was really wasted in WWE. They gave him a bonus to stay there. And, in a sense, I think he felt he was in a more stable environment with WWE, but he was also concerned, would they have it out for him? How would they treat him after what Bret had done? And, Davey and Jim had also left WWE. So, and they, made all these promises to him that they were going to give him a big push. And, you carry the storyline where he would, try and get revenge for Bret, and they did that for a little while. He worked some matches with Shawn and Triple H, which was really almost a shoot rivalry because they were all part of the instigation to screw Bret out of the title with Vince. But then after a few months they didn't seem to know what to do with Owen, and then they kind of just turned him heel, and then he was just sort of a mid-card performer and very, very much underused and wasted. Had a decent run with Jeff Jarrett as a tag team, and they had a very close friendship, and that was nice. I think Owen enjoyed that, and I think it kind of got to the stage where, he was there just to make his money, and he was really looking forward to his retirement a few years down the road where he could spend more time with Martha and his kids. And I think he was just kind of counting the days. He wanted to make a little more money, and he needed to stay there a few more years and then retire and step away from the ring. Owen never wanted to be there past his prime and just sort of trying to hang on to a job like some wrestlers and overstaying his welcome, so to speak. And that's sort of the sad thing, that he never got that opportunity, and he was just put in this very unneeded, unnecessary, silly role, to be lowered into the ring like that. It was so reckless. It was so unsafe. And, he should never have been put in that position, but, and it was just tragic on so many levels, but, Owen never really let the business consume him. He probably should have, been more forceful about his role and just, but, he almost didn't care. It just got to the point where he was just doing his job. And, even though he was asked to put over some guys that he really shouldn't have, and they didn't use him in a really meaningful role. For him, I think it was just a job, and he didn't get too consumed about whether he was winning or losing or who he was working with. And, as long as he was making his money and he could look forward to going home at the end of the trips and seeing his family.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking to talk about him. I mean, I've only just wrapped up recording a few months ago, myself and Ash, my Gone Too Soon co-host, recorded a special episode where we paid tribute to Owen around about his what would have been his 60th birthday, and the two of us spoke for around 2 hours. I think we could have spoken for another 10 hours quite happily, because we were just sharing all these memories that we had as fans of your brother. But that, the thing that was great throughout that conversation, apart from obviously when we talked about his passing, was actually just we were smiling from ear to ear for the entire 2 hours, because actually, just as a fan, Owen brought so much joy to me and millions worldwide. And even when he was a despicable heel, you look back at him and you're just like, oh, it was just all hilarious. It was just all so brilliant. I mean, he's obviously, deeply and dearly missed by so many of us. Especially,
yeah, even coming back as the Blue Blazer, but he was impersonating Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, and that was Owen. He never took the business too seriously and just wanted to have fun with it. So he was comical and mischievous, and he enjoyed playing the heel role. Just because he knew that was the reaction he was getting from fans. But I always enjoyed him more as a sympathetic baby face, in some of his matches against Muck and Singh and, Steve DeSalvo and some of these bigger heavyweights. And, some of his earlier Stampede matches were just incredible. And, I don't think he really got the opportunity to showcase enough of that in the WWE, except for when he worked against Bret, and had some pretty good matches with Davey Boy too. I remember they had a match for the European title.
Incredible.
And,
one of my favorite matches.
And you could just see the traces of the old Stampede wrestling style, in those matches he had with Owen and with what Owen had with Bret and Davey, just hold for hold, just great matches, and it was very skillful and very technical, and he could still do that whether he was a heel or a babyface.
Yeah, and he also made everything count. Like when he won his Slammy Award, no one cared about Slammy Awards. Owen Hart was the only person who cared about Slammy Awards, and then he goes and steals the second one and becomes a 2-time Slammy Award winner.
Yeah,
and then when he breaks his arm and he has his cast on for about 6 months, it's just like it's just all these little things that he'd do. It's just really great old school storytelling. Yeah. When he becomes King of the Ring and he's the King of Hearts, just any opportunity he had to kind of rub Bret's nose in it, he'd take, wouldn't he? It was fantastic.
Yeah, no, it was great character development, great storylines. Owen, took full advantage of that, and that was great.